Caw, caw.
Sorry to keep you all waiting, and welcome to Inside Vaping, your weekly resource for vaping news. Our show airs live on Tuesday nights from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time via YouTube livestream at www.youtube.com/InsideVaping. The show is divided into two distinct segments. In the first half, if the first half were an automobile, it would be a Bentley, while the second, uncensored version would be a VW. A VW bus parked down by the river. That's a little scary. If you choose to participate in the second, uncensored half of the show, you may join us exclusively on the Quest Vaping Network at www.vapors.tv/QuestVaping. But be warned, Uncle Dagger's questionable music selections may cause irreparable damage to your cranium. Welcome, James, Uncle Dagger, Martin, and Dane Smith. How you boys doing?
I think that sounds like Ed's first read.
It does.
Did I suck?
No.
I don't know. I thought it was pretty good, actually.
Thank you.
So did I.
So,
it was pretty good.
We have a couple of special guests tonight, but first we want to get to the pink elephant in the room, which is that the show was like 20 minutes late airing.
25.
And I heartily apologize for that. That's all me. We use XSplit to broadcast this, and it's kind of confusing at times. And I actually deleted the whole scene with everybody's titles and everything else, so we had to recreate it on the fly. But thank you for your patience. Just to recap, last week we ran a contest for the Simply E-Juice e-liquid. Congrats to Paul R., who won that. I found out later that Paul R. was actually one of the people who was working the sign-in table at Expo, and he hadn't gotten a chance to even test any of these juices, and there were so many great juice vendors out there, so I'm glad he won it. Moving on to the first thing we want to cover from last week, though, is we have... Oh, everybody wasn't supposed to see that yet, but apparently they did. So, fail there. What the heck? Okay, so the first thing I want to bring up is this Labo cotton from Amazon.com. Now, this is what we talked about last week in our teaser, this Labo cotton, which I picked up from Amazon, and there were a couple people on Facebook and ECF that were recommending this stuff over like the Koga or the Kojindo cotton. Certainly the Kojindo prices have kind of skyrocketed now that vapors have gotten a hold of it. I don't even know if I can afford it, even if I use my Sephora Insider card at this point. But the puff cotton is a really good alternative. I think it runs about $13. Yeah, $13 for a package of 200 pieces. And they're identical to the size that you get usually handed out as a promotional thing. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and look up organic puff on Amazon.com. There's a couple different sizes. And Dane, I believe you had a follow-up on a story as well.
I did. Last week we talked a little bit about the proposed ban on flavored e-cigs in New York.
No.
And the Observer ran a story this week that I thought was very interesting and wanted to share with you gentlemen. E-cigs just can't seem to catch a break. You know, just 3 weeks after serious doubts were raised about vaping's effectiveness, Queens Councilman Costa Constantinides, he had introduced a bill limiting the sale of flavored e-cigs to tobacco bars. This would be in addition to the general e-cigarette ban announced earlier this year. So the AVA, which, and I'll read it verbatim from the Observer, this is really a cheeky piece here. The American Vaping Association, which is an actual organization, had a slightly different view. The AVA supports common sense regulation of its products, such as New York's existing ban on the sales to minors, AVA President Greg Connolly said in a statement. But adults are free to make their own choices. This proposed law would not only take away a consumer choice, it would eliminate a competitor to big tobacco. Mr. Connolly also expressed concern that the various vaporiums in the city, which vapologists test out new flavor combinations, would struggle if the bill became law. Then, and it goes on to say and finish. Then again, if your top skill is vapology, you should probably find a more practical way to blow hot air anyway. This is a pretty scathing commentary on vapors and vape shops from the Observer as a whole. I'd expect a little bit more from them, but by giving Greg Connolly only a small byline rather than a large story, it's pretty clear to me what they intended to convey just by reading this story. Any thoughts on that, Ed? Did you have a chance to glean this over? James, did you guys take a look at this?
No, I'm sorry, James.
Yeah, I mean, this shouldn't come as any surprise. It's basically another hatchet job, and the fact that they kind of, tongue-in-cheek laughed at the response from the AVA is not really surprising. It's not in this day and age.
I think it speaks a lot on the perception that we talked about last week as well. If this really doesn't put it into perspective for vapors, I think it should. They give us plenty of ammunition every week, just as we give them as much the other way, about how to confront a lot of these issues in different legislative meetings and town hall meetings and things like that. And this one is still pretty clear that things really haven't changed.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to change overnight. The only thing we can do is try to make these small inroads wherever possible, and a lot of times that means just educating people. And it's a slow process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. There's a negative perception that we're plagued by just by nature of the fact that this is emitting something in the air, which to the innocent bystander looks like smoke to them. So, you're already fighting a negative perception there, but trying to educate people is really key.
I think to sum it up, we are guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, definitely. So I know we've got a lot in store this week on the show, and I think, Dane, you're going to introduce our first guest here. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Tell me.
I'll give you a little byline and a little teaser here first. We have a very special surprise guest who'll be joining us later in the show. You'll definitely want to stay tuned for that. But first, joining us this week is Upstomp of Hingham Hill E-Liquids. Wow, I can spit that out. And the host of The Awesome Show, which airs Friday nights at 8 p.m. on the Quest Vaping Network. It is a real pleasure to have Upstomp here. How are you tonight, Mr. Upstomp, sir?
I am grooving. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, it's Jay and I used to do a show on Quest a long time ago before I started with the vape team, and now of course it's ironic we're actually back on Quest as well for the after show, but it was always enjoyable to hang out and watch the mass holes, as a couple of the guys call themselves.
Yes, and I think we'll be calling ourselves that once again at some point soon.
So we're definitely delighted to have you with us tonight, Upstomp.
Thank you.
That's not the end of the awesomeness, though. Let me introduce our second guest. This is the inimitable Basil Ray, formerly of VapeLink. How are you tonight, Basil?
I'm good. That's maybe more credit than I expected to get. Tell you what.
Me too.
And I've actually got that is what this picture here, which you probably can't see because of the delay on the feed, and unfortunately there's some audio and video issues that are plaguing us. But this is a picture of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with Basil Rathbone, who previous to meeting you was the only Basil or Basil that I had ever met. I got to tell you, you're nothing like him.
It's good company.
It is good company, though. Those were excellent films. So the main reason that we've brought Basil, excuse me, is we want to discuss the DNA40. And I've been following your posts on Facebook for the past few days, and I'm really intrigued by some of the information I learned regarding Evolv's new DNA40 chip. These chips have been in the hands of beta testers, and of whom Basil was one, and they were sworn to secrecy, but the NDA ended, was it the October 9th? Was that the date?
Yeah, it was late last week. I think it was the 9th.
Okay.
The days all run together for me, but yeah, it was the 9th, like midnight on the 9th.
Yeah, and how long have you been beta testing the DNA40?
I've had it all said and done for right around a month.
Okay.
And I'll be pretty honest. I mean, it is pretty much probably 90% of what I've used to vape since I got it in my hands. It's been a real treat.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I mean, the information is all over the internet right now, so if you do follow any kind of vaping news, you're probably already aware. The DNA is the first production board that accurately measures and limits temperature at the coil. It uses a special kind of nickel wire in temperature mode to precisely regulate and limit the temperature of the coil. Why would we want to do this? So, Basil, I know you've probably studied this as well. To begin with, we've talked about on Vape Team and actually on Inside Vaping as well, how e-liquid begins to break down when it's exposed to high temperature levels. I think with VG, isn't that point where it begins breakdown right around 500 or 550 degrees?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Now, there's some debate in terms of where that actually is, because when you see that it's like 554 number, that's pure VG. Yeah. And, it's very rare that you have a true 100% VG liquid. So there's probably some wiggle room there. And I don't think we know exactly where that is. I think the research is going to fire up on that pretty soon. But, that's really the concept behind the new board.
Yeah, and obviously, when that begins to break down, it has the potential to form these unwanted toxins like acrolein, formaldehyde, etc. So the new DNA has multiple modes of operation. Can you tell us a little bit about the modes?
Yeah, so if you're using just standard nichrome or Kanthal wire, it's going to run like a regular DNA board, like the DNA20 or DNA30, but it's going to be capable of putting out 40 watts, right, within that operating range, which would be 0.7, I think, to 2 ohms is kind of where they rated. It should fire down to 0.15, 0.16 with traditional Kanthal. When you're using the nickel wire, the Ni200, that's when you're going to have the ability to run in temperature mode. And I'll tell you that building coils with nickel is a whole new ballgame. Yeah. A lot of what we've come to just kind of assume is standard practice, right? So, standard, 6 to 12 wrap micro coils with thick gauge wire. That's not going to work here. There's just the wire composition is a lot different. The resistance is so low that you're going to use a lot of wraps to get into that operating range. The operating range in the Ni200 is 0.10 ohms to 0.4 ohms. Okay. So,
and that was
as
one
an
of the
example,
questions I had too, because obviously you've used this on a variety of atomizers, correct? You've used it in drippers and K-Funs, etc. Just looking at the number of wraps, and I'm sure that's what you were getting to next, the number of wraps that you need to come out with a coil that's optimized for the full range, it's quite a few wraps, and I would imagine it's challenging fitting that under the chimney. Is that the case, or is it something?
Yeah, with a standard single coil build in something like a K-Fun, it's not too bad. So what I've kind of found to be the sweet spot for me, I have the wrapping rods from Avid Vapor, and I use the 3mm wrapping rod with 28 gauge Ni200, and it's 10 wraps in pretty much a kind of a micro coil configuration. Now it's not as forgiving as a micro coil with Kanthal, so you got to do a little bit of extra checking or tweaking to make sure. So with the Ni200, you can still get a hot spot when you're building a coil, and it's a little bit harder to tell when you're in temp mode. But that's kind of the trick, is getting it to a point where you don't have that, and it's gonna just fire as a regular coil would, right? So no hot spots. Dual coils is a whole nother story, because you're using so much wire, especially when you start getting to like 28 gauge. I wouldn't even think about trying a dual coil with 26 gauge. It's just, there's not enough resistance there.
Now, Ray, when it comes to the Nickel 200, can you get that in different gauge sizes? At just one gauge size that you buy that in?
Yeah, the thickest gauge I've seen it in is 26, and I've never used 26, but I have sitting here. I've got a roll of let me see, I've got a roll of 28, 30, and 34.
Are you finding like the same now, where if we go to that lower gauge, is the vape getting any better, or to stay with the thinner wire?
I honestly, outside of that 3mm K-Fun build, everything else I do is pretty much using the 30 gauge. Okay. That seems to kind of be the sweet spot for, especially if you're going to go dual coils. I think you really need that, because you need that extra tiny bit of resistance. So it's, 10 to 12 wraps, I think, is going to become pretty common with this wire.
Yeah, I'm on eBay right now. I just want to know which one to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What Mamu has done is she's done double twisted 34.
I think I actually have a link to the wire here too, if I can pull this up. So this is the pure nickel wire, 28 gauge, which there is also a 30 gauge, and this is non-resistance wire. So basically, to just kind of refresh people's memory here, I don't know if many people will even know what this is, but back in the old days when people used to use ODs and Penelopes, you had resistance and non-resistance wire, and you had to wrap these wires around each other and create a wire for your coil. And your non-resistance, those were your legs, and your resistance piece was the one that actually heated up. So somebody came up with a spot welder, a little spot welder that you could weld these wires together with. And I remember, Dane, it scared the hell out of me the first time I used it, because you're not expecting this little jolt of electricity, and then suddenly these two wires are fused together. And kind of a cool little piece, but largely outdated now since very few people do that. But we're actually, in this application, we're using non-resistance wire in the DNA40. And I think that's probably a large part, a key to its success in this application. And we're going to get to that, but one of the things I wanted to talk about, Basil, is some of the other features of the DNA40. I read up on it quite a bit today and learned quite a bit. I've got a friend, Chicago Rod. You're probably familiar with Chicago Rod.
I know Rod.
He's definitely a character. But he's one of these guys who, he's got a DNA and he wants to vape it at very, very low wattage. Well, unfortunately, with the DNA30, you could only go so low with a given type of build. And I don't have that exact number, but I do know, for instance, I've got a dripper on here that's 0.5, 0.58, something like that. And the lowest I can really go is like 22 watts, 23 watts. I can't bring it any lower than that. The new DNA actually has step-down technology built into it, so it will take whatever you're vaping on, it's going to take it down to a minimum of 1 watt. So if you're one of these ultra low wattage vapors, you're going to be able to use that. One of the other things I was really excited about, Basil, was the fact that they finally have reverse polarity detection. I mean, how long have people been complaining about that? And I know previously they weren't able to add it to the older boards because I think at one point Brandon said it was going to add additional bulk, but they somehow figured it out. So that's great as well. And the preheat, now, is that perceptible, Basil?
I certainly think it is, right? So this is one of, I think, the unsung kind of features at this point is this preheat. And in order for that to work, I think you really kind of need to be in temp mode. So as an example, right, I'm going to put on a fresh dripper here, one that's just, it's been sitting around, so it's just ambient room temperature. And I have it set right now to fire and maintain my temperature at no higher than 450 degrees, and I have it set to 25 watts. So when I first put this on, it detects that there's something different about the coil than the one that I've just taken off. So I'm going to say new coil, and watch how quick this fires up.
Wow.
I mean, you can see it pop, I mean, almost immediately. Whereas when you think about your traditional, especially for people who are using mechanicals or other regulated devices, you get that ramp up. So here's just a Chinese box, right, with a low ohm build set to about 50 watts. And just, I mean, watch how long it takes for this to really, I mean, it takes a couple of seconds for this. So that dump of power up front makes such a big difference. And I notice it. And what's different is, especially if you think back, if you're somebody who played around, like, I'm sure you guys probably all use the Kick. Remember the old Kick?
Sure.
Yeah, just a variable wattage drop-in module for a mech mod, right? Yeah, it's going right there. One thing that if you ever use the Kick, you noticed is you could always feel it ramp up.
Yeah.
So you would start to fire, and it would take a moment for the atomizer resistance to be read and the power to be adjusted appropriately. Here it's the other way around. So rather than getting that ramp up, you almost maybe notice the ramp down, especially as you start to vape through whatever, the liquid that's suspended in whatever medium in your coil you've got. I find that to be a preferable vape because I don't feel like I'm sitting there sucking, waiting to get that vapor. It's there right away.
Right. Yeah. So one of the other things too is, we talked about the step-down technology. I think a lot of people have a misconception because, when we talk about these two different modes, the wattage and then, the temperature mode and then regular operating mode, I think a lot of people think that they're exclusive, but one of the things is that you're still going to be adjusting your wattage and your temperature, correct? So you set your temperature and then you set your wattage. And I believe in Phil's video, Brandon talked about it, and he said if you want to equate it to something, wattage is the equivalent of volume, and the temperature setting is the equivalent of taste. So you can still have clouds based on the wattage, but you can get great taste because your juice isn't burning. It's not constantly heating and getting hotter and hotter until it's just boiling inside that chamber. Is that correct?
Yeah. And the one thing that I notice the most is when you think about the wattage, and I know a lot of people, and I think Brandon and Phil may have even talked about it, is that wattage really becomes that mean setting, right? So to best fire up and maintain that wire temperature, you really think about it in terms of where is that wattage going to be on average. So you start to get a feel for that. I mean, there's certain setups where, I can't necessarily run this set to 40 watts and have it maintain easily or very well. It's not going to be as good of a vape, right? Because you're going to constantly feeling it cut out to help maintain that wire temperature at 450. So, you can see that. You'll actually see the wattage fluctuate across a vape.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you a question. Is, like, if you set it for 30 watts, you fire it, it hits 450. If you set it for 40 watts, does it actually feel any different when it gets to 450 degrees? Is it going to matter?
Because it's going to drop your wattage way down.
Okay.
So it's going to shoot to maintain that temperature as close as it can across the length of the fire.
Okay. So it's just a matter of playing with it, and then you'll actually find out. Or does it actually show you what that wattage is once it hits temperature? It does. Okay.
Yeah, and when it gets to a point where it's struggling to maintain that temperature, the screen will actually flash temperature limit, and that's a pretty good indicator that you might just want to bump the wattage down a little bit because you've got it set to a combination that it just can't maintain.
Okay, so one of the things that I saw people talking about was the fact that you could actually, if you had this set up properly and you're using temperature mode, you can actually get a notification when you're when you're about to get a dry hit. It'll tell you because it's gonna. What does it do? Does it start stuttering? Is it just that it isn't a harsh hit?
You're going to get that temperature limit notice, and it's basically going to drop you down to almost not firing when it's completely dry and it's detecting that. Now it kind of depends on your wicking medium, right? Because some of that's going to play a part into it in terms of how fast you can get that juice to the coil, and what maybe the potential combustion point for that is. So cotton is something like 410 degrees. Now I've got it set up at 450. I'm actually running stainless steel mesh here right now in a Genesis, and it's a pretty great vape. So when you get there, it's basically going to have to drop it down so much that it's going to feel like it's not firing, or it's almost going to sound like, think back to the Darwin, that kind of dead fire, where it would kind of sputter a little bit and then cut off. It's going to feel a little bit like that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is with the temperature adjustment. In your ohms, I know we talked about how you can use regular Canthal wire in this. One of the new things that they're talking about is how it has like a soft limit built into the chip, correct? So basically, yep. Instead of getting, how with a DNA, if you tried to fire something that was too low, it would actually end up rebooting on you.
Right.
Or it would say that it was too low to fire. There's a soft limit, and my understanding is that the peak limit for amperage is 23 amps. The soft limit is 15 amps. So if you put a 0.1 on a DNA40 with regular Canthal, it will fire, but it's not going to fire at 40 watts. It'll fire at whatever that soft limit of 15 amps is. So just
Correct.
realize you're not going to have your full operating range.
Yeah, and at 0.1 with regular Canthal, you're probably going to be having trouble because that's exceeding spec for Canthal. So spec for Canthal is 0.16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what will happen is it will drop you down within the safe operating range of your chip and or battery, right? That's an important piece too, is that it's not going to try and draw more than it can detect your battery is capable of outputting at any time.
Yeah.
And it will flash current limit on the display.
So we've got a question from the room too. Russ Dennis asks, is there any taste difference using the NR wire versus Canthal?
I haven't noticed anything. I know some people, and I caught this today in one of the Evolv groups. I don't remember which one it was, but somebody today had. I think it was actually a question that came into Brandon via email. Some people had said at first they had a different. They got some sort of funky taste from using the wire. I've never noticed any difference. But what he suggested was basically just giving the wire a rinse and a scrub, and just drying it down, and then using it, as the process to produce the wire is different than it is Canthal, and there's the possibility of some residue potentially on the wire, is the way I understood it. Now, that may not be 100% accurate. I read it in passing today.
Yeah, I think I read that as well, and that was in a message from Brandon responding to somebody that had concerns about the fact that we're using pure nickel wire. And I actually had an infographic to put up here. If I can get it to load, I will show this. Let me see. Do I have it here? Do I have it here? I do. Okay, so this is basically an excerpt, but what he harks back to is the Gonowick study and Dr. Michael Siegel's statement here. Basically, it boils down to anything a nickel 200 would do, a nichrome coil would already be doing, and worse due to higher temperatures. And nichrome coils are the only ones that have been studied in any meaningful detail by the real scientists, labs, and MDs. What Canthal is or is not doing, we cannot say, as we haven't really studied it. So, and this is where he actually details what you were talking about, Basil. He says, the problem is with the commercially available nickel 200 wire, they use a particularly nasty tasting oil in the drawing process. So if you roll a new coil without degreasing the wire first, you initially get a nasty taste from that oil. A good washing with acetone or simple green, followed by rinsing in water, solves that problem. But that is something to point out if people are reporting weird chemical taste when they first try it. So there's the answer on the nickel thing.
So, and a quick question, is there a way to even burn that off now? Well, I was supposed if you turn off temperature, right?
Yeah, and that's what I find myself doing whenever I set up a new coil. Especially if you're going to attempt to do some sort of a contact coil, right? Like a micro coil where your coils are scrunched together. You'll find that it's harder to work out hot spots in a contact coil with the Ni200, I think, than it is with traditional Canthal. So I'll turn off temperature mode, I'll drop the wattage way, way, way down, and try and fire it and get it to a point where I feel pretty good about it before I even bother to wick it. And then once I've got it wicked, I'll put it back in temperature mode and just go to town.
So one thing that I don't think anybody mentioned is with the old DNA spec sheet, the DNA40, it had a 3.0 ohm max coil for that. With the new one, it's 2.0. Just so people are aware of it. I don't know how many people are actually using like the mega carts that were 3 ohm, but just to put it out there, I guess it won't fire with a 3 ohm load. That's
I think it'll fire, but I just think you're not going to be able to get the max out.
Okay.
I think that's the range. I could be wrong. The way I understood it is that was kind of the range of what it could push up to that true 40.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting things about all this is obviously we've seen, well, I've seen some videos of people trying to fire it in different temperature modes on a completely dry coil. with fresh cotton in it. And it's interesting to note that the cotton, it singes at certain temperatures, but it doesn't necessarily just burst into flames. Like if I were to take this Raptor chip and turn it all the way up with fresh cotton in it, it's gone. So that is, I guess that's just visual proof that the temperature monitoring system actually works pretty well.
Yeah, now again, the caveat to that is it's 410 degrees for cotton to combust, I guess, if you will, right, to burn. And the trick there, too, is that if you have a hot spot in that coil, despite the efforts of the temperature chip, you may run into issues. So you kind of have to bear that in mind. It's going to take a lot of adjustment, I think, for people who find themselves or feel like they're pretty good at wrapping coils with this NI200. It's super soft as well, which makes it sometimes tough to really wick, because as you're trying to wick, the wire is just so malleable that it moves around.
Yeah. And what about Genesis tanks? Because I know you did a little bit of experimentation with this as well, and that's something that, you know, I think it's fallen out of favor to some extent now. Even though they're an excellent vape, most people just don't view them as something that's accessible because of the fact that you have to oxidize your mesh. They're so susceptible to hot spots, etc. So what have you found with your testing with that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I really don't think this chip was necessarily designed with stainless steel mesh as a wicking medium in mind, right? So I'll kind of put that out there. Do you have the picture I sent you yesterday?
Yeah.
But I posted this around Facebook. So this is 325 rolled mesh, completely unoxidized. I wrapped a coil, about 10 wraps, I think it was, of 30 gauge NI200, dropped the wick in, no hot spots, and that's after vaping about 10 mils through it. So there's zero oxidation. I didn't do any torching to the mesh. I just dropped it in and vaped it, no hot spots, and it worked really, really well. That's set. I usually am set at about 450 at my temperature limit. I find that I start exceeding that, and juices don't taste the same anymore for whatever reason.
Sure. And I know they mentioned that eventually this may end up urging or causing juice manufacturers, juice makers to add things to their labels that state like a specific temperature that it works optimally at. So that's kind of exciting as well. But that's pretty much it for the questions that I had for you. I don't know, does anybody else have any other questions about the DNA40?
I don't really have any questions specifically about the DNA40. As most of you guys know, I'm more of a software guy than a hardware guy. But it does bring up some interesting things with regard to, you know, the e-liquids breaking down. You know, that's kind of been in the, you know, talk about that has been in the community for a little while. And I know that Dr. F is looking to fund a study to talk about e-liquids breaking down at certain temperatures. And I guess I'm just kind of wondering, and this isn't something I'm necessarily looking for an answer for, but I'm wondering if e-liquids truly have time to break down in the environment that we're vaping in. You know, absence of like a pressurized environment where these liquids have a chance to change states as opposed to actually having the molecules change. You know, I'm just wondering if we're kind of we're going after a problem that doesn't exist. And I think, you know, Dr. F's study will go a long way to you know, answer those questions. Because much like water, you know, when we boil water, water doesn't turn into hydrogen and oxygen. You know, it changes states instead. In lieu of changing the actual molecule, it actually changes states. So it moves from liquid form to steam or to vapor. So I guess I'm just kind of curious as to how all that's going to flush out.
Well, we got a little bit different situation here, because maybe the idea that you're thinking of is a pot of boiling water reaching 212 degrees and starting to put off steam, rather than a hot 600-degree rod that you shove in water. Not only are you turning that water into 212 degrees, but now you're superheating that steam. And could you be doing something to it?
Well, and that's exactly the question I'm asking. You know, does that change what actually happens? I don't know. I'd be curious to find out.
Yeah, so the study that Jay, or Upstomp, excuse me, I keep calling you Jay.
Oh, God forbid.
Upstomp is alluding to is actually the new study from Farsalinos here. Let me see if I can pull this up, just so people are aware of it here. And this is through Indiegogo, and this is a new campaign that he has here, which is seeking funding. Let me pull this up. So this is temperature of evaporation. So basically this is going to be the study that a lot of people have really wanted for a long time. This is going to be using the type of devices that we vape on, not Cigalikes, not necessarily clearamizers, but rebuildables, and using high wattage applications, SUB-OHM, testing higher wattage with shorter puff duration. So we don't really vape. A lot of us don't vape the same way that we did 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of that has changed, and I think this is a much needed study. So we'll have a link to that study in the description for the episode as well. And I'd highly recommend that you go and give them some help there, some monetary help.
I did just think of a question for Basil. Apples for apples, 18650 for 18650. Do you feel you're getting longer battery life now?
In temp mode, absolutely. So what I find is with VTC5 and just a K-Fun, I set it usually to about 28 watts, 450 degrees. It's kind of just where I found that I like the K-Fun. And I can easily get through 2 tanks of liquid on about half of a charge.
So if you were to put that in a percentage, are you getting like 20% more battery life, maybe 10?
I would say it's probably around 25, it feels like.
Okay.
Now, it's all just guesswork, right?
Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. I mean, you're talking about a compressor limiter type of situation, like to use a sound engineering analogy. So you're more efficiently using your power, capping it off where you don't necessarily need it.
Yep. And I get almost equally good battery life out of the LG HE2s. They seem to run really well in this box, and they're less expensive and they're easier to get.
Yeah, and I know it also has some protection in there, so if you do, and I don't know if we covered this or not, but it's not going to pull more current than the specific battery can handle. So that protection is still built into the device. So if you drop a Panasonic in it that has a lower maximum amperage output, then it's not going to pull more than it can handle. So a lot of safety features that are built into it. There's quite a few devices that went live today with pre-orders or with orders for stock on hand. I know the Vapor Flask, the Hana, I think Vapor Shark is doing a pre-order on theirs. I forget the name of the 3D printed box. Which one was that, Basil?
It's the BAP from Vape Dojo.
Okay,
so and BAP Good.
The BAP, which that one's pretty interesting to me because it is a dual 18650, and I like the idea of having 2 batteries just because, I know how quickly I go through batteries in single cell applications.
Great form factor on that too.
Yeah.
Well, I believe the Proto Vapor also had a few.
Yeah, that's right. Ed, do you still have your Proto Vapor, or is that?
Yes, I do.
Is that behind the curtain?
It's behind.
We get to see behind the curtain now.
I know.
Is there a service van back there?
Down by the river.
The Proto Vapor.
Look at that. There you go.
I was going to sell this thing, but you know what? I think I'll just put a 40 in it and be happy with it again.
It's got a built-in belt clip. You can't sell it. How convenient is that?
It reminds me of my Mantis so much.
I love mine. I use it all the time.
Ed's got an oversized pocket protector that he can slip that in. That's just the way he rolls. So, Basil, that's pretty much it. We did have a video clip to play, but unfortunately I can't get my camera streaming through the call, so there's going to be a delay on it. But we're going to go ahead and play it after you leave the call, and maybe you can catch it in the replay. I'm hoping. And we actually have somebody else that's going to be weighing in during the after show with impressions as well. But thanks a lot. So
Later.
Yeah, it's another story about senators in the FDA penalizing of months-old e-cig regulations. And it's an interesting read because there seems to be a 180 all the time in position, especially in Congress, over this issue. And it sent to the FDA on Thursday, which was this past Thursday. Senators Barbara Boxer of California, Dick Durbin of Illinois urged the agency to adopt stronger warning labels for e-cigarettes and that the proposed warning label does on scientific facts. Of warning labels that correct it, and to take this opportunity those that have been long on the market that to ensure label on the electronic product from tobacco. Push the FDA to quickly finalize regulations for fear e-cigarette manufacturers are beginning products. That's a pretty important statement, and I'll read that one again. Fear beginning to concoct their own health warnings about have an unstable heart condition, high blood pressure, diabetes, or persons who are at high risk of heart disease. Basically, like many of the poultry label states, nicotine is addictive and habit-forming and is very toxic by inhalation. People show the lack of uniformity and leave out pregnant women, as well as dangers posed by additives and other letter reads. There we go with the benzene and formaldehyde. What's the big hurry all of a sudden? And is this a good thing or a bad thing for the industry at large, scientific evidence being pumped into the pipeline?
Well, I think this is just a prime example influencing these standards. Jay Reynolds' warning. You see how doom and gloom it is, and it's coincidental.
I don't know who that was. That must have been. Oh, it's the doggone ads, man. There's ads on every website. All right, let me get rid of these. Get rid of all so that we can continue our conversation. Okay, go ahead.
All right, where the hell did I leave off? Okay, so you look at R.J. Reynolds, their warning label. It's all doom and gloom, and coincidentally, they happen to be the ones that are actively lobbying the FDA to basically restrict. I don't think that's an accident. I think they want to create a very focused environment in which that's what I think is going on.
The interesting thing here,
I agree.
What I don't understand is there's a disparity, and I think the article alluded to this. Obviously, you have the conventional combustible product, and they successfully lobbied to have and yet there's seemingly more stringent requirements on the labeling for electronic cigarettes. So that's a head scratcher, unless you think about the fact that they don't really have an interest in promoting this for bets a little bit, Jay.
That's exactly what they're doing, because in their world, either they're going to have their e-cigarette and nobody else can have theirs, or they just want to see it banned outright. Yeah. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're hedging their bets, and trying to squeeze out the rest of the.
No, I think you guys, they basically took the words out of my mouth. You're good.
Story about e-cigarettes. Are e-cigarettes the new methadone? This is from WNYC.org and hopefully not blow everybody's eardrums out because the audio levels have changed.
Cigarettes are under fire. Several manufacturers have recently put stark public health warnings on their packages, while the Federal Food and Drug Administration considers. Fred Mogul recently attended a heated debate on the subject.
In one corner, Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist, the idea that if you're not sure what a substance can do, such as nicotine from cigarettes, best to keep it out of your
dangerous, not only in itself, but its likelihood for leading to more dangerous drugs.
In the other corner, ethicist Amy Fairchild touts e-cigarettes is a lesser evil.
Because they greatly reduce the risks of tobacco. For adult populations, it's a far better option than continuing to smoke.
The two debaters at Columbia University last week. The discussion ranged from the effect of nicotine molecules on the brain to the effect of to prohibit kids from getting these cigarettes, but Kandelen has backed the war on tobacco by lessening the stigma around
30 years and reducing the rates of smoking in this country. What will happen?
E-cigarettes could restore some of the glamour and mystique to smoking, something public health big pitch is that smoking is dirty and vaping is clean reasonable. They're certainly not harmless, he said, and more research clearly needs to be done. But downsides.
A little bit, it reminds me of the early days of the battle over methadone, when people said, what do you mean you're going to give an addictive drug to is better than injectable heroin?
Outside the lecture building, a woman who would only give her name as Karen was vaping an e-cigarette while waiting for her elderly father to emerge from a medical appointment. Karen cigarettes. But will e-cigarettes get her to give up smoking altogether?
I would like to think so, but I hate to say there's something about a cigarette, you know, when you're an addict.
For now, Karen can vape in restaurants in the suburbs, just not in the city where the indoor smoking ban includes e-cigarettes. Legislators in Albany have a year, but they say they'll try again in 2015. For WNYC, I'm Fred Mogul.
E-cigarettes
are
under...
I don't think the boys knew that we were live during that segment, but it was very entertaining screen, which is...
Yeah. For some reason, I thought that was video. We're over here being asses.
It was mentioned that you were moisturizing.
Yeah, that noise.
I was moisturizing a part of my body, I guess, in a way, yes.
So basically, to summarize, the way I look at this article is that this is yet another attempt by the ants to say that, vaping is a gateway to deeper addictions, and I don't understand that, Dave. Elements of it that, obviously we continue to use nicotine because it's something that our bodies develop a need for. But I don't view it as a gateway to more heinous vices at some point.
No. It's like making the delineation between sugar and crack. Come on. Saying, look, we know that nicotine is an addictive substance. Methadone, like going off of heroin to methadone, is really pretty preposterous. It really is.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's too much to say about that article beyond that. Now at this point too, because we have to make room for our special.
Have me, guys.
Yes, and we'll see.
Yes, and hopefully you can make those noises again.
If I'm still awake, sure.
There you go.
Perfect.
Oh, cool.
A tutorial.
Excellent. We can put it on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. All right, guys. You have a good night.
All right, you too.
Yeah, we appreciate your paragraph and a half.
You have some new news on the modding front, correct? With the hashtag. I mean, that's coming out pretty soon, right? You got
Yeah. My hashtag took the board to come out, and I just got I got word from my engineer that the board is done. As we speak, he's assembling 10 of them, and I am probably going to have to throw the money away that I paid to the electrical engineer to create the board, because I'm going to squash it, redo the board for a 40. So
what's the proto that you're holding up there?
Yeah, this is the I don't know, alpha, beta, whatever the hell you call it. Yeah, the only thing that wasn't finalized on this one is the placement of the USB, which I had to place with the...
What? I think that one has date engraved on it, doesn't it? That one that you're holding right there?
No, it doesn't smell funny.
All right.
But what I was thinking about doing is, in after hours...
Let's actually be some compelling video.
Yeah, I don't know. We can make fun of him while he's doing it, though.
That's
yeah,
true.
Exactly. I mean, I'll set up the camera down low on the desk, and we could talk about whatever while I'm doing it. I mean, that'll be... See if I'm the modder that I should be.
Okay, I believe I got news that our special...
For those of you who... The uninitiated, we have a very special guest. This gentleman has been all over the internet taking shots at a certain segment of the community.
Should we play a video
we'll introduce our special guest.
I'll go ahead and do that now. So here is the video. I can get it to play. Let's try this.
Can I take your stuff?
I have the force. Pew, pew. If only we had light and wispy. Doodle-doodle-doodle. He won't fall fig chews. Ding dong. Formaggio chopped me dead adamant. Five miles to some Porsches. Woo dog. Reap mer.
That is one of the funniest things that I have seen in a long time.
It is. And for those unfamiliar, that is on this gentleman's YouTube page. So joining us here live tonight, I have been trying to get this interview for weeks, him on Inside Vaping. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear vaping.
Well, thank you for having me, Dane.
Yeah, yes. Stanley and in other places around the internet for some time now, vaping and cloud chasing communities. How did you come to form this opinion, and what do you feel should be done in the community?
I was told I was not going to, but okay, so back in 2012, a cloud chaser broke into my house and attacked my mom. He gave her a sleeve. So ever since then, I've had an issue. Yes. Now I think we need to augment mental health. Searching is a disorder that requires treatment. Then and only.
So you believe that by establishing.
Yes, I think we as a community need to raise awareness. I think we need a ribbon or a colored armband that Tom Brady can wear, and we can snuff this.
That's interesting. There are rumors that you yourself, on occasion, have participated.
Yes, I sub-ohm vape, but I also masturbate every day. But I don't do it in restaurants or hotel lobbies or airports.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a little disconcerting.
I think we lost Ed during that last comment. I think he was trying to cloud chase Stanley.
Oh, well, he's doing it in his home. Yes. He's okay. He's okay in my book. There's no disorder there.
You know, Stanley, you become quite the celebrity in the vaping world in the past few months.
Oh, hands down, it's got to be 5 ponds. Anybody that can fool people into paying almost $2 a mil for juice aged in a beaver's ass for 3 months is God to me.
Gee,
I thought they were aged in oak barrels. I could be wrong.
Tomato.
Are there any plans in the works for a Stanley the Viking e-liquid line?
By me, he's told me that they all taste exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to. So like taste like Ukrainian dog giblet saute or something.
That'd be an interesting flavor to vape. Something you probably.
Yeah,
there's nothing worse than burnt giblets.
That particular flavor would be designed for 7 watts or less. Yes.
Yeah, burnt giblets would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So what do you think of this new DNA40?
What?
See,
yeah, that's actually
I don't understand louder and have 30 be the top number. I don't understand why you need 40.
I think that's called the spinal tap theory.
My mom has very restricted cable.
Oh, you don't get very many channels there? Do you have for new vapors to try to continue to keep them off of traditional tobacco, Stanley?
Well, first of all, but also, don't take our community too seriously, folks. You know, most of us are just 2 Facebook posts away from eating our own poop.
That is the truth. That is the truth. So, who is in your top? Oh well, who is in your top 5 of vaping resources? Who do you go to when you look for vaping resources?
Who do I go to? Well, my mom. I want to go to people. So there's 2 right there. Vaping resources. Geez, I don't know. Upstomp talked to me a lot. He's kind of
watch other people's videos too, like Phil Basardo, Grim Green, those type of videos.
Well, I'm kind of forced to. I made the bad lip reading video, and that thing blew up like crazy.
That was excellent, by the way, Stanley. So I could not stop laughing.
So I just went to. I'm just gonna go to all the reviewers who have the most views, and I'm gonna make bad lip reading videos because people seem to get a kick out of that. So I'm gonna keep doing that.
Well, I think that you are just a few clicks away from absolutely taking the web by storm. I appreciate you taking.
Well,
your people are very protective of you, Stanley.
Yes. Dr. T always has to screen all my calls. He doesn't like me talking to the general public because he's afraid that results of me being exposed to everyone will result in new legislation.
I could see that happening. Well, Stanley, thank you for joining us, and we certainly invite you to the After Hours show with us, as I'm sure our viewers have.
I would love to. I have a window of freedom of about another half hour.
The uncensored portion. Again, folks, thank you for being patient. We had some technical. Thank you for being with us, Stanley, and truly enlightening listening.
Thank you very much.
Like he said, there's a lot of drama out there in the community, and a little lighthearted fun goes a long way. Anything else from you?
Are there any updates on our contests?
Okay, the wood box giveaway, but we will suffice with the old one here. Our giveaway is close. They have been making improvements on the box mod as well. They may have plated. So some very cool innovations here as far as a dual a parallel box device, and that is I use a parallel box mod because if you're doing SUB-OHMs, if you're one of those people like the ones that Stanley was talking about, safest way to do it, short of using a regulated device like a DNA. Or a Raptor. The Raptor actually has pretty good headroom as well. But it all depends on the way it's set up, too. You can set it up with under voltage protection, over voltage protection, all that stuff, which is going to make your eyes roll back in your head. So let's go ahead and thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will catch you next week.
Take care, folks.
See you next.
Bye-bye now.